I saw something last night on the congressional website, and it had extended a specific deadline connected with the continuing appropriations bill from December 11th until December 18th. I was concerned about the December 11th deadline. A lot actually happened on that December 11th deadline. Now, presumably, there's something that's teared to the deadline being today. The problem is that in and among there is a provision regarding the opiate epidemic, or rather, assisting people who have a problem with narcotics and having access to up to 3 days of emergency drugs on either a day by day basis or 3 days at a time in order to deal with opium withdrawal. Not only is the timing of this completely unacceptable, but the manner in which it has been used in lieu of actual political process is disturbing. And more than that is also the completely racialized implications of it and the horrendously unconstitutional, illegal, illicit, and amoral systematology that is rolled out under the auspices of the alleged opium epidemic that go back 20 years. Now, I'm not going to get into the details of that right now because that's going to be a part of the indictment and the charges that are pending. But I want to share something with you. It's art. I'm going to talk to you about art. I was in Chicago and they had an art exhibit in the Harold Washington Library in downtown Chicago. This was in 2016. And it was in the stairwell. And in between certain floors, what they had is an art exhibit. It was supposed to be a memorial to the Vietnam War. And somebody who I understand was a veteran had made dog tags, military dog tag replicas of everybody who was named as on the Vietnam Memorial. So every name of who had died during Vietnam that was listed on the Vietnam Memorial was listed on a dog tag. And these dog tags were suspended from the ceiling in a very, very specific manner. They were hanging, almost like it's raining dog tags. And this each dog tag had the individual name of every American soldier, and there was one black, unnamed, nameless dog tag that was supposed to represent all of the dead Vietnamese. All of the dead Vietnamese were on one dog tag with no name, and all of the Americans had an individual name. And on some level, I think that the first evocation I got was that they were angels. It was like they had died, and then they had gone to heaven, and then they were angels that were descending from heaven in order to help the people. But that one black dog tag with no name, I took that dog tag in another dimension. I took that dog tag and I swallowed it. I took it and I swallowed it. I was going to get it out of there. I don't know what that really means, right? On one level, I do. I have right now a PDF version that has been available for a while online for free of a book called On Revolution, which is selected writings of Ho Chi Minh. Now, when I first read Ho Chi Minh in translation, I was devastated. He speaks in Vietnamese differently than he does in French. And I just recently, for the first time ever, heard an audio recording of an actual speech that Ho Chi Minh gave, and I was astounded because it's not like Lenin. It's not like Castro. There's a way he speaks, there's an inflection, there's a cadence, there's a rhythm. Even if he's talking about very, very significant and important things, this makes a difference. And so it was very profound on that level. But what was also profound is what I read in this book, and it hit me, and it's been haunting me, and it's been devastating me the entire time I've come back from Honduras, which was opium and alcohol were specifically and strategically used to neuter the enemies and to force the women specifically, but not exclusively, including young women who weren't even at the age of puberty, into prostitution. I'm going to go through and I'm going to just share with you what might be Twitters from Ho Chi Minh about whatever you thought you needed an emergency appropriation for, just snuck in under the radar for people going through withdrawal. Withdraw. I see. You needed a specific appropriations completely distinct from anything that you've done in over 25 years of normalizing American society to a specific political engineering around the concept of drug addiction being a disability that needed special dispensation. You needed a special appropriation to have its expiration date. Sorry, the appropriations bill had its expiration date. The actual mandate for implementation would come when, in relation to that pharmaceutical company operative that spoke before Congress yesterday with already official prepared remarks on official letterhead posted online. I see. Let's start at the beginning. What does Ho Chi Minh have to say to us today? It's important to acknowledge Ho Chi Minh. Why? Because the Americans lost Vietnam. There is absolutely no dispute about it. If you're a Vietnam veteran, among the other things you have to address and deal with is the fact that you lost. You were on the losing side. Why? Why did we lose? Today, instead of contributing together with you to world revolution, I come here with deep sadness to speak as a member of the Socialist Party against the imperialists who have committed abhorrent crimes on my native land. You all have known that French imperialism entered Indochina half a century ago. In its selfish interest, it conquered our country with bayonets. Since then, we have not only been oppressed and exploited shamelessly, but also tortured and poisoned pitilessly. Plainly speaking, we have been poisoned with opium, alcohol, etc. I cannot in some minutes reveal all the atrocities that the predatory capitalists have inflicted on Indochina. Prisons outnumber schools and are always crowded with detainees. Any natives having socialist ideas are arrested and sometimes murdered without trial, such as the so-called justice in Indochina. In that country, the Vietnamese are discriminated against. They do not enjoy safety like Europeans or those having European citizenship. We have neither freedom of press nor freedom of speech. Even freedom of assembly and freedom of association do not exist. We have no right to live in other countries or go abroad as tourists. We are forced to live in utter ignorance and obscurity because we have no right to study. In Indochina, the colonialists find all ways and means to force us to smoke opium and drink alcohol, to poison and beset us. Thousands of Vietnamese have been led to a slow death or massacred to protect other people's interest. Under racial hatred. We will not speak for the time being of the poisoning and degradation of the masses by alcohol and opium of which the colonial government is guilty. Our comrades in the parliamentary group will have to deal with this matter one day. Well, I think we should continue because it seems that our comrades in the parliamentary group already decided how they would pursue this topic. So let's continue. This is a quote. Okay. Colonial sadism is unbelievably widespread and cruel, but we shall confine ourselves here to recalling a few instances seen and described by witnesses unsuspected of partiality. These facts will allow our Western sisters to realize both the nature of the civilizing mission of capitalism and the sufferings of their sisters in the colonies. Quote, on the arrival of these soldiers, relates a colonial, the population fled. There only remained 2 old men and 2 women, 1 maiden and a mother suckling her baby and holding an 8-year-old girl by the hand. The soldiers asked for money, spirits, and opium. ... Let's continue. Under your proconsulate, the enemy's people have known true prosperity and real happiness, the happiness of seeing their country dotted all over with an increasing number of spirit and opium shops, which, together with the firing squads, prisons, democracy, and all the improved apparatus of modern civilization, are combining to make the enemies the most advanced of the Asians and the happiest of mortals. This is a letter he wrote to the Minister of Colonies. Understand, he wrote this letter officially. It wasn't just meant as some sort of satire. He went on the record. Here is another letter to Leon Archambault, who was the reporter on the budget for the colonies, member of the Colonial High Council. You state that if France has sinned in colonial matters, it is rather from an excess of generous sentiment than anything else. Will you tell us, M. Archambault, whether it is out of these generous sentiments that the natives are deprived of all rights to write, speak, and travel, etc.? Is it out of these same sentiments that the ignoble conditions of native is imposed on them, that they have robbed of their they have been that they are robbed of their own land only to see it given to the conquerors and forced thereafter to work as slaves? You yourselves have said that the Tahitian race has been decimated by alcoholism and it is disappearing. It is also from an excess of generosity that you are doing all you can to intoxicate the enemies with your alcohol and stupefy them with your opium. There's another one here. A text he had written. It is from this oppressed, weakened, and emaciated country that millions of pastors and several thousand men, 40,000 to begin with, are further going to be wrung to satisfy the insatiable appetites of the concessionaries and the personal ambitions of a gang of unscrupulous politicians. It is not enough to demoralize the whole enemy's race with alcohol and opium. It is not enough to take 40,000 volunteers yearly for the glory of militarism. It is not enough to have turned a people of 20 million souls into one big sponge to be squeezed by money grabbers. We are, on top of all this, to be endowed with slavery. It keeps going. Here is one where he actually does a form of an audit. He is looking through information concerning trade data. He goes through the numbers, he evaluates the exports. This is what he says. Well, do you know what is the native's share in this gigantic trade in the product of his land and his labor going on under his nose? He had, all told, 542 sailing boats displacing 12,231 tons. According to this outline, we can conclude that the French colonization is only practiced in favor of a gang of adventurers, dishonest and ineffectual politicians of the mother country, alcohol and opium racketeers, unscrupulous profiteers, and dubious financiers. The proof? Well, he provides you with his conclusions of his audit. Regarding a French colonialization on trial. Talks first about what he calls a blood tax. Just so you know, I've read through all of this more than 10 years ago, before I was disabled. But under volunteering. Here is what a colleague tells us. The native proletariat of Indochina, since time immemorial, squeezed into the form of taxes, forced payments, corvées of all kinds, and the compulsory purchase of spirits and opium, has had, since 1915-16, to put up with volunteering. The events of the last few years have provided the pretext throughout the length and breadth of the country for big roundups of human material, quartered under the most varied appellations. Sharpshooters, skilled workmen, unskilled workmen, etc. In the opinion of all impartial, competent bodies called upon to make use in Europe and the Asian human material, this material did not produce results justifying the huge expenses that its transport and keep entailed. And then the chase after the said human material, called for the occasion volunteers, a deadly ironic word, gives rise to the most scandalous abuse. According to the Indo-Chinese newspapers, opium house licenses are granted to widows of French soldiers killed in the war and to French war wounded. I see. Under a consideration of a heading, poisoning of the natives. It's a letter from the Governor General of Indochina. He's quoting Mr. Resident, in accordance with instructions from Mr. Director General of the Excise, I have the honor to beg you to be so kind as to second the efforts of my department in the establishment of new alcohol and opium houses. To this effect, I am taking the liberty of sending you a list of the homes which should be installed in the various villages mentioned, most of which are entirely without spirits and opium. And then he goes on to give his acknowledgement, as Ho Chi Minh says. There were at the time 1,500 alcohol and opium houses for 1,000 villages, while there were only 10 schools for the same number of localities. Already before this famous letter, the 12 million natives, women and children included, had been made to swallow 23 or 24 million liters of spirits yearly. Then there is another one where he's discussing, it's in the same thing here. However, under this signboard, a waggish hand had stuck a copy of the letter from Mr. Salraut, advising his subordinates to increase the number of alcohol and opium houses in enemies' villages with the following inscription. While the enemies have already 10 schools and 1,500 alcohol and opium houses for 1,000 villages. So this lets you know, as Ho Chi Minh is pointing out, they absolutely knew. Here's the question. Who worked in those opium houses? Here's another question. Who worked in those schools? Here's another question. Who worked in those schools, and did they visit those opium houses? Let's see what we got next. We're almost done, don't worry. Now he's discussing the other side of the brain, I guess. Justice is represented by a good lady holding scales in one hand and a sword in the other. As the distance between Indochina and France is so great that, on arrival there, the scales lose their balance and the pans melt and turn into opium pipes and official bottles of spirits. The poor lady has only the sword left with which to strike. She even strikes innocent people, and innocent people especially. Wow, I can only imagine what would happen if you gave her meth instead. And then he begins talking again. Another official correspondence within the realm of discussing this letter. Talking about a court verdict. The Court of Summary Jurisdiction has just awarded 13 months imprisonment to Ferdinand Esseline and the widow Gayer, and 10 months to George Courtier, for having owned, transported, and sold 1 kilo of cocaine or opium. Very well, and that makes, by simple reckoning, 36 months of prison for 1 kilo of drug. It would therefore be necessary, if justice were equal for all, as it is said, for the life of M. Sarao, Governor General of Indochina, to be enormously long in order to pay the whole of his penalty, for he would have to do at least 1,350,000 months prison every year, because every year he sells to the enemies more than 150,000 kilograms of opium. Wow. Is that a disparity in sentencing? Now, they're talking about, here's another one, an attempt to agitate. What did they do in those days to inspire people? An appeal from the Peasant International to the working peasants in the colonies. This is a quote within his context. To the working peasants in the colonies, modern slaves who in millions in the fields, savannas, and forests in the 2 continents are suffering under the double yoke of foreign capitalism and your local masters. The International Peasant Conference, meeting for the first time in Moscow to work out the organization of the struggle in which the workers of the world are so far lacking, appeals to your class consciousness and calls on you to come and swell its ranks. Even more than your peasant brothers in the metropolitan countries, you put up with long working hours, poverty, and insecurity. You are compelled to do forced labor, back-breaking portage, and endless corvées. You pay crushing taxes. Exploiting capitalism is keeping you in obscurantism, oppressing you ideologically and decimating your race by the use of spirits and opium. The odious system of denizenship imposed by capitalist imperialism is depriving you of all individual liberty and all political and social rights, thus placing you on the lower level of beast of burden, more like law enforcement animals. We're not done, we're almost done. Now, at some point, there comes a manifesto. Third paragraph. From the economic point of view, you remain subjected to the heavy and unpopular head tax and porterage tax, to the salt tax, to poisoning by and enforced consumption of spirits and opium, as in Indochina, to night watching, as in Algeria, to guard the property of the colonial sharks. Then he goes on to list offenses regarding the Declaration of Independence of the Democratic Republic of Vietnam on September 2nd of 1945. I'm not going to read the whole Declaration of Independence. There's actually audio of it. You should listen to it. But in here he identifies one of the offenses that justified and necessitated a Declaration of Independence as being: to weaken our race, they have forced us to use opium and alcohol. Finally, again, addressing the Frenchman in Indochina. What does he say? Our struggle is not directed against France, nor is it directed against honest Frenchmen, but we are fighting the cruel domination of French colonialism in Indochina. You will understand to what extent this colonialism has misused the reputation of France and imposed upon us disastrous calamities. Forced labor, corvées, salt tax, compulsory consumption of opium and alcohol, heavy taxes, complete absence of freedom, incessant terrorism, moral and material sufferings, and ruthless exploitation. Ask yourself who has benefited by making us suffer in such a way. Is it France and the French people? No, France does not become richer from colonialist exploitation, and it is not due to the absence of this exploitation that it will become poorer. On the contrary, expenditure for the colonies is another burden loaded upon the French people's shoulders. How many trillions of dollars have we been obligated to provide as a loan of sorts, and in other manners insurance of sorts, for these exploitative individuals and their elite select consortia that have not been able to cover their asses for the last 30 years, so that every 10 years they don't have to orchestrate this all over again? I'm just saying, so you know, there is absolutely no inconsistency, as far as I understand and believe, in identifying a bar association or any elite select membership organization according special privileges to its members while denying people their constitutional rights, as a communist organization that is a violent junta seeking to overthrow the democratic government of the people. These were their terms, these were their definitions. I am not going to let them sell me and my people for more opium and alcohol quotas. Do you understand? There is so much we could have done by now. There is so much else that could have happened. You needed to prioritize a victim to drug abuse as that which you would save above and beyond anybody else. The truth is, without you orchestrating us as victims, we don't need your salvation.